The Israelites continue on in their journey through the wilderness to Mount Sinai, which is also known as Horeb. The place they come to, where Moses strikes the rock, is probably not the mountain itself where the law is given, but in the general region of it. The Lord tells Moses to go to that rock, where he will be standing on top of it. This is not described when Moses and the elders get there. Earlier in 16 verse 10, the Israelites look out to the wilderness and see God's presence in a cloud. Perhaps his presence was likewise signified at this rock. In the final verse of this episode, verse 7, the grumbling of the Israelites is condensed into this question: is the Lord among us or not? It would make sense then that his visible presence was there, but, as it is not described, perhaps the provision of water is enough to answer that question. It is noted here that the Israelites tested the Lord, whereas in the previous 2 chapters it was the Lord who tested them. This period of mutual testing is presumably why it has taken so long for the Israelites to arrive at Sinai. Moses told Pharaoh that it would be a 3-day journey to the mountain, but it has taken 6 weeks. Interestingly, this means they arrive at Sinai close to the time when Pentecost would eventually be celebrated, which is why in later Judaism that festival was associated with the giving of the Torah. In chapter 17, verse 8, Amalek comes to fight Israel. Here is the first mention of Joshua and Hur, and here is the origin of the deep hostility between Israel and Amalek. Here and later on in the Old Testament, Israel is commanded to annihilate Amalek. They are warned not to forget to do so. There are times in the Old Testament where God, in his inscrutable wisdom, does not want to leave survivors from a battle. This may be because judgment was required to be severe, or to protect Israel from some future compromise, or both. When in the Song of the Red Sea Yahweh is described as a man of war, it does not mean that he is aggressive or belligerent. It means that God will make war on evildoers and will defend his people, and that he is always the victor when he does so. Nevertheless, the ancient experience of and mindset towards violence is hard to comprehend for us now. But systems of government and theories of justice are all quite modern things. Back then, it was not hard to find yourself at the edge of a sword or point of a spear, or on the verge of being stoned, as Moses complained about in verse 4. During the battle, Moses raises his hands. Some have wondered if this was to give battle signals, but an Egyptian text has been noticed which refers to the arms of Pharaoh being lifted up for protection. This is likely what Moses is doing. The banner he makes afterwards is a war banner. The Egyptians had banners for each of their divisions, each with a different god on it, such as the division of Seth or the division of Amun. But the Lord is the only God of Israel, and he is the Lord of armies, or the Lord of hosts, as it is normally translated. He leads them all, and all armies are subdued before him. Moses in chapter 18 is reunited with his wife, 2 sons and father-in-law. Jethro is deeply impressed with what he hears about the Lord's deliverance, and he acknowledges his superiority with sacrifices. They have a banquet in the presence of God, meaning that the Lord is the guest of honour. Jethro's conversion is not necessarily implied here. As a priest, he was not expected to be monotheistic. He might serve at one particular shrine, but this does not mean he would not acknowledge the power of other deities. Jethro does, however, help Moses in his leadership. When you compare this section with Numbers 11 and Deuteronomy 1, you find 2 strange differences. In those later books, this organisation of Israel only occurs after the law is given on Mount Sinai, after they have left the mountain. Also, Jethro is not the one who suggests the solution to Moses. The question becomes, why here in Exodus is the scene brought forward out of sequence, and why is Jethro involved? There are no immediate answers to these questions, and as we saw in Genesis and in Exodus, and even in John, the chronology of a narrative can hop around a bit if certain material is best placed thematically elsewhere. We saw, for example, in Exodus 12, that all the instruction regarding the Passover festival was given before the story on which it is based is actually told. All we can say at this point is that these ancient books were drawn together out of various very old traditions, some of which were probably only oral for a long time. They therefore sometimes reflect different time periods, even in the one text as it has come down to us in its final edition. In the previous chapter, Moses has Aaron put manna in a jar in the ark before it has been constructed. And in the Song of the Red Sea in chapter 15, the conquest of Canaan is referred to, and even the Temple of Jerusalem, which will not be built until Solomon's time. For now, though, Jethro's advice is very helpful. The organization imposed on the tribes of Israel will preserve his leadership and also highlight its importance. The more minor cases can be solved based on the legal principles which will shortly be revealed, but the more difficult cases will require prophetic intervention. These must be brought to Moses.